Hey, I'm Vlad with GlobMarble, and today we're going to be stamping the SM1923 stamp series. And we're going to be using these stamps on a stamped concrete overlay called SureStamp. The most important part about using an overlay is always the prep work. If you don't do the right prep work, then the overlay will soon delaminate, start chipping off, you're going to have all sorts of problems. Let's say you've got an existing concrete floor, it's old, it's dirty, what do you got to do to it? Well, the first thing is you have to grind the entire floor to expose the pores of the concrete and remove any of that contaminant, any dust, any oils that could be trapped into the surface of the concrete. Any cracks or holes are then filled in with a patching compound like SurePatch or Deep Patch. The next step is going to be using a primer called SureBond. That's going to make sure that the concrete and the overlay bond real well to each other, that they're not going to chip off and delaminate. But I'm going to skip all that because I'm only using a sample board, much like I did with my other stamped concrete videos. The only difference is at the end of this video, I'm going to break it. You see, some people have concerns about whether overlays really do stick to the concrete and whether they're going to last for a long time, but every single time I've used the stamped concrete overlay, I realized just how difficult it is to clean that stuff off of anything. Tools, any areas where I spilled it, even to concrete that hasn't been through the proper prep work. I take it off and it literally just sticks and takes that old concrete with it. So I'm going to be applying that SureStamp directly onto a board of melamine. Melamine is supposedly a non-stick surface. I've used epoxy on top of this and the epoxy comes right off. At the end of the video, I'm going to see just how hard it is to rip that SureStamp off of this melamine surface. Now, before mixing any of that SureStamp, I want to decide what color I'm going to use. Originally, the SureStamp comes in a white concrete bag. It looks very good on its own. But today I'm trying to mimic something that looks a little bit like Bluestone. And so out of all these different colors available, I think I'm gonna go with something like Smoke. That's gonna be a very nice base color. It's a mix between a brown and a gray. I think that's gonna be a great option. These are all integral pigments, meaning they're gonna be mixed directly into the concrete. And the color pack dosage ratio is really easy. It's just 1 bag of color packs per 1 bag of SureStamp. So it's time to start mixing up the SureStamp, and there's a specific order in which I like to mix all those different materials, and there's a reason for that. The first thing I like to do is add the water. On the back of the bag and on the website, it tells you exactly how much water to put. For the SureStamp, it says about 2.5 to 3.5 quarts per bag. I always recommend starting off with the minimum amount, so I'm only adding 2.5 quarts per bag. The reason for it is you can always add water later, but if you put too much in the beginning, you can't take it back out. And always remember to record the amount of extra water that you're adding, because any amount of water difference might affect the color of the certain batch that you're mixing right now. The next step is going to be to use our color packs. I'm mixing up 2 bags of SureStamp, so I'll mix up 2 bags of the color pack in the water. The reason why we want to pigment the water first is to make sure that the pigment is completely saturated, completely wet, that there's no like dry chunk spots that are going to appear as streaks when we're troweling the product. And also when you put the pigment into the water, it just disperses a lot quicker, a lot evener. It's just the fastest way to mix. And lastly, once we have our pigmented water, we start slowly introducing the SureStamp. First, I'm only gonna add 1 bag, mix that entirely, and then start introducing that second bag. It's just gonna be a lot easier for me to mix, even though I'm using a double paddle, very professional mixer. This method of mixing is going to be extremely helpful, especially if you're using one of our economy mixers that aren't as powerful as the heavy-duty German-made Collomix mixers that we offer. And now I'm gonna go ahead and scrape the sides of the bucket, because you see all that unmixed material is still left over on the sides and on the bottom, the corners, those tight to reach areas. Scrape that up and then continue mixing it until it's at a completely mixed consistency. So this is the consistency that I like. I only ended up adding another half quart for the total of both of these bags. Nice, soupy, trowelable consistency. But now we gotta ask, what thickness do we put this on the floor at? And the answer is always gonna depend on the mold that you're using. The thickness of the stamp overlay you apply should always be the difference between the highest point in the mold and the lowest point in the mold. The highest point usually being the grout lines. These particular molds we're using today doesn't require a very, very thick thickness. They only need to be applied at around 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch. And how we're gonna get everything to that right thickness is using this tool called a gauge rake. You see, it has these tiny little sleds that are adjustable. I adjust them to about somewhere in between 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch, and I'm gonna use this to apply it evenly, consistently across my entire surface. So as you see, this is a completely clean and brand new piece of melamine board. Let's dump our material out and see how well this stuff sticks. Now that it's more or less spread out, I'm gonna go ahead and hit it with a trowel. I like using a pool trowel just because it has those rounded edges. It's a little bit nicer to kind of get everything nice and even. The reason you want to smooth it out is because if you don't, some of this stuff, these rail marks from the gauge rake, they might translate over into the stamp texture, so you want to get all that nice and smooth. Now that I smooth it out, I gotta wait a little bit before I start stamping. And the time you have to wait will vary based on the weather, the temperature, a whole bunch of stuff. So I can't tell you exactly how long, but you know when you're ready, when you can press onto the concrete. It's still flexible enough to move around, but nothing is left on your finger. At that point, you're ready to start stamping. But before we do that, I wanna do another test. Here's an old piece of concrete I have. You see it's real dusty, real dirty. No amount of prep work done on this. Let's see what a big chunk of this stuff will do the next day. So it's been around an hour and a half, and I think it's ready to start stamping. So now there's two options for a release agent. The first one being powder release, where I would throw the powder on, stamp, and then the powder is going to give it this secondary accenting color. Or the option that I'm going to go with is the liquid release with the product GSR. I'm using the liquid release just because the powder release is really messy. I'm stamping indoors. I don't want all that dust to go flying everywhere. The powder release is the best option for me. And you can see how I'm applying it is using this pump sprayer. All I have to do is pump up the air, fill it up with a GSR, and I'm gonna spray it on not only the overlay, but also on the stamps. Onto the stamp mat. This is going to make sure that absolutely nothing gets stuck on there. If you start noticing that the release agent is coming off, you can always just go ahead and reapply it. And if the material started setting up a little bit already, I would use a tamper, but this is still a little bit wet. I don't need to do that. All I need to do is walk on it with my feet, and that's going to be good enough. You can see some of this material getting pushed up from under the stamp. That means I used way too much material. I could have stretched this out a little bit more, but now we know that the coverage for this isn't exactly 2 bags per however many square feet this sheet of melamine is. And the reason why they have different colors is each different color was made from the same type of stones, but all of them have different grout lines. They were molded from different stones, so you're not going to get a repetitive sort of like copy-pasted pattern. And now you might be thinking, well, he messed up, because you see the pattern is slightly going this way towards this wall. Now I don't have any space to stamp towards over here. These stamps are pretty rigid. They're not going to be able to get up into this corner. And for exactly that reason, we sell these flexible mats inside of our sets. It's a little bit smaller than the original stamps, but that's just because if we were to have a flexible mat of this size, it would be really uncomfortable, really not user-friendly to stamp with this stuff. So it's the same type of stones because they're all in the same type of set. But you see, that stamp is able to move. It's very flexible. I've just realized that doesn't fit in there either. So no worries, we're just going to use that same flexible stamp mat. Instead of going in the same direction, I'm going to go ahead and flip it over so the pattern doesn't look like it's repeating itself. I'm going to remove some of this excess that's built up around these corners, and I'm going to touch it up with a touch-up wheel. And now all we gotta do is wait until tomorrow. So it's the next day, you can walk on it, but now I have to find a way to wash all of that release agent off. It's all oily and we're gonna be putting a stain on it, we're gonna be putting a sealer on it. We need to get rid of that oil. And the best way to do it was with a product called SCR. It's a concrete concentrate degreaser and cleaner. For overlays, it says to mix it 3 parts water to 1 part SCR, which is what I'm gonna do. And if you notice, the best way to use this stuff is by putting the SCR into the water, because if I were to put the SCR first and then start spraying from a hose, it would start getting all foamy. I wouldn't get a good read on how much I'm adding. This stuff replaces muriatic acid. It's a lot better for you and for the environment than that really harsh chemical stuff. You see that it starts working immediately. It starts kind of creating this white type of foam texture. And the easiest way to work it in is with a thick brush like this one. Not only is this cleaning up the concrete, killing that oil that's on top of the surface, but it's also opening up the pores of the concrete in a chemical reaction that's going to let the stain and any type of sealer that we put on top of it completely kind of etch its way into it. The most important thing when working with SCR is you don't want this stuff to dry out. If you see it starting to dry, all you got to do is hit it with a hose, just keep it wet, or else the SCR might start discoloring the concrete. Now again, instead of letting this dry, I'm going to go ahead and wash it off with a hose once I'm done. So now that this is all clean, we can go ahead and start putting the stain on. And the stains that we offer are the water-based stains called EcoStain. There's a lot of different color options, but I want to go with the titanium gray to be the base coat because I noticed it has a slight blue tinge to it. It's not entirely gray, it's also a little bit blue, and I think it resembles Bluestone a lot. The EcoStain is also a concentrate. You dilute it with 3 parts water to 1 part EcoStain to get the desired color on the color chart. That being said, you don't need to go with that manufacturer recommendation. You could go a little bit less, a little bit more, depending on how bright and how concentrated you want this stain to be. So this 32-ounce container will stretch out to a total of 1 gallon if you're using it to get the exact color on the color chart. So I'm gonna go, I put the stain inside of a pump sprayer, and now I'm just pumping it up full of air, and this is gonna make sure I can use the sprayer by just pressing continuously, and it's gonna continuously spray instead of having to keep pulling the trigger over and over again. You definitely need this for a large project like stamped concrete. And here's another pro tip. Before putting the stain on, I lightly mist the stamped surface with some water. It doesn't have to be wet, but I'm just misting it. And the reason I'm doing that is so that the stain moves around a little bit more freely, and it kind of like helps settle all of the deep points get the darkest and the light points stay the lightest. It's gonna look like natural stone. And you can see what I mean by that texture being slightly bluish. Don't need a lot. And the thing I love the most about these stains is that they're water-based. If they're acid-based stains and you don't like the way that they look, once you put them on, that's it. You got what you got. You get what you get. You don't be upset. But with the water-based stains, if I don't like it, I can always come back later and then manipulate it with a wet sponge to go into exactly the directions that I want it to go into. And for these water-based stains, you only need to use one color. You see, like, we already have two colors, the integral and the stain. It's giving us that bi-color look. I think it's still too boring. I'm gonna start using another stain called Kayak. Let's see how that looks on a small corner. You never wanna start off big. You start off in somewhere where it's not that conspicuous. So I see that, yeah, a mix of these two stains does look pretty nice. I like it, I'm gonna keep going. And when I'm adding this secondary color, I'm not really thinking about it. There's no real like rhyme to where I'm putting it. I'm going as random as possible, and that means don't think too much. Just apply the material. Just for added effect, I'm going to go ahead and add that stain to each and every grout line, just to make sure it gets a little bit darker than the rest of the stains. Okay, so we're almost done detailing this, we're almost done texturing everything. I think it's going to look really nice, but one thing you have to make sure that you have to know about this product is when it dries, the stain is going to look a little bit lighter than it does when it's wet. And when it's wet is how the stain is going to look after you seal it. Every single sealer gives it a color enhancing type of effect on concrete, and it's going to do like a similar effect as wet concrete. So if you like the color when it's wet, that's okay. Don't panic about it drying out and getting lighter. That's not what the color is going to look like. The sealer is going to enhance it and get it back to this beautiful color that you're seeing right now. Now all we got to do is wait for it to dry, and then we can talk sealers. So it's the day after I put the stain down. It's completely dry. It's 7 days after I initially casted this concrete. You do want to wait at least 7 days for an overlay like this before sealing it. The reason being, you don't want any moisture stuck underneath that sealer. Otherwise, the sealer has nowhere to go but up. It's gonna travel upwards, cause discoloration, and it's gonna look really ugly. The sealer I want to use for this project, and what most of you guys are probably going to be using, is HS200, because that's an acrylic sealer. It's meant to be applied outdoors. It's very good with UV stability, and it's slightly more breathable than some other sealers, so that if there is a little bit of moisture, it's not that big of a deal. It's a single component sealer, so we don't have to sit here mixing part A, part B. You just pour this straight onto the concrete and start rolling. Now you could roll this sealer, you can spray it, do whatever you want. If you are going to be spraying, make sure that it's a sprayer that's sealer friendly, because these solvents and these sealers and stuff like that usually don't react really well with the hoses and regular pump sprayers like the one you saw me using the night before. And you can immediately see this color enhancing quality of the sealer. With every stroke, it's going back to the original wet look of that concrete. And this is a high gloss sealer, but if you want it to be matte, we do sell a matting additive that will make the sealer completely matte. I want it to be high gloss. I like this wet look. And it's really important to back roll the sealer just to hide any roller marks or anything that you could have like that. Back rolling is just, if I'm rolling horizontally right now, then I'm going to go back and start rolling vertically. This is going to ensure not only no roller marks, but a full and total coverage. It's going to make sure that the sealer gets spread out very nice and even. Now all we gotta do is wait. Now we remember what happened when we attached this glob onto this nasty, dirty piece of concrete. Let's see how easy it is to take it off. Look at that, like it wasn't the Surecrete that failed, it was the concrete itself. And while we're at it, this is an overlay I got at one of these big department stores, yuck. Let's see how durable this is. It's also on top of the same product, it's on top of melamine board. And that chips right off. Completely crumbled. No adhesion whatsoever. Now, as much as I love this design, the colors look really good, I gotta do the durability test. And it kind of hurts, to be honest, because I really like the way that this thing looks, man. But I need that melamine board back. I think I could get under there with this ice scraper. Let's see if I can. Okay, now I'm done for real. All right, end of the video. So as you guys saw, the SureStamp sticks to things that it shouldn't even stick to. It was an excruciating hour trying to clean up that melamine board. So if you do the right prep work, do everything correctly, that SureStamp is 100% gonna stick to your concrete. You're not gonna get any delaminations. So you've made it to the end of my video, but now I wanna ask you for a quick favor. See, the YouTube algorithm gets tricked into showing my video to a lot more people if a lot of people comment on it. So criticize me, praise me, or just ask a question. As long as you leave a comment, I'm gonna appreciate it a lot. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.